Howdy folks, hope you all had a good weekend, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles, and I think I've got a good one for you today, a little bit of something for everybody. Mostly today's video is going to be about the new cat, Nino, and how he's getting along with the other two girls, and how the new PC's performing. And there are some surprising results there, but before we get on to that, it's time to pay the bills, so time for a word from our sponsor. You're probably aware that thousands of companies are collecting, aggregating and trading your personal data without you knowing anything about it. They get this information from data brokers. Now you have the right to request data brokers delete what information they have about you and protect your privacy. The bad news is you probably don't even know who these data brokers are, and even if you did, it would take you years to do it manually. Incogni does the messy work for you. It helps you protect your privacy, take your personal data off the market by reaching out to data brokers on your behalf, demanding that they delete any data that they hold on you, dealing with their objections, and ensuring that you get added to what's known as an exclusion list, so they can't just recollect your data and use it again. All you have to do to get started is head over to incogni.com/jingles and use code JINGLES to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. Create your Incogni account, tell them whose personal data you want removed, and just let Incogni take care of the rest. They'll keep you up to date with the monthly progress report, and they continue checking any data brokers that they have contacted to ensure that they remain in compliance. So that's incogni.com/jingles, use code JINGLES at checkout, and get 60% off your Incogni plan. And now on to the good stuff. This distinguished young gentleman is Nino. He's about 5 years old. He's a rescue. The foster that we got him from really didn't want to part with him, and once I'd gotten to know him after a few days, I could really see why. He is a fantastic little cat. He's a mixed breed, although judging by the patterning on his coat, I think there's some Bengal in him somewhere. And he is just the most lovable, playful, and affectionate little fuzzball I have ever known. When you introduce a new cat into a household with other cats, you never know how it's going to go. Sometimes they just don't get along with each other. So that was my biggest worry. I wasn't too worried about Akazuki, although she didn't like him much at first. She would hiss at him a bit. She didn't really want to go anywhere near him. But Juzi, my old ginger girl, I thought she might be a bit of a problem because it took her a month to get used to Akazuki. And the reason I've gotten Nino is because Akazuki really needs a playmate, because she's 6 this year. And Juzi's 14 this year, and Juzi's just too old to be putting up with Akazuki's shit. So I wanted a younger cat around the same age as Akazuki that she could play with, and Nino fit the bill perfectly. There were initial problems, of course, but not from Nino. He was very friendly and approachable to the other two cats. It was the other two cats that had trouble adjusting to him, but it only took Akazuki about 3 days. And now the two of them play together. They chase each other around the house. They're fantastic. Juzi was a bit more of a problem. Like I said, it took her a month to stop growling at Akazuki when she was a kitten. But after 5 days with Nino, even Juzi's not too bothered by him anymore. And this morning, for the very first time, I was able to feed them all together at the same time, in the same place, without Juzi growling and hissing at him. Because up until today, I've had to feed Nino separately from the other two because of Juzi. But today, she was no problem at all. I've also had some issues getting Nino used to his automatic cat feeder, because I've got cat feeders for each of them, because they all have different dietary requirements. Juzi's on low-calorie food because she's a bit of a chonker, and I don't want her getting overweight. Well, more overweight. So you know, if you give her the chance, she will eat Akazuki's food. So they've all got their own individual feeders that are keyed to their microchips that will only open for them. And Nino didn't like it very much. He was a bit scared of it at first, but after about a week, he's starting to eat from his own pet feeder. And this morning, I put all 3 of their feeders down, and they all ate right next to each other perfectly happily. Even Juzi's more or less accepted him now. I mean, she's not quite there yet. She still doesn't particularly like him very much, but she's coming around. It's going to be fine. Plus, she is going to appreciate having him around, because it means Akazuki isn't bothering her anymore, because now she's got a little boy cat to play with. And the two of them are getting along great. I haven't seen them grooming each other or lying down to sleep next to each other yet, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time. And that was a big problem because Akazuki and Juzi both sleep with me. And I know Nino wants to, but up until now, Juzi hasn't been letting him, which means he's been latching onto Rita. And of course, she's not complaining. Oh, and he's a little food thief as well. This is another one of the reasons why I have to have individual pet feeders for them. It's not that he's greedy, you put his food down, he doesn't just gobble it all up in one go, he only eats what he wants, but if there's any food lying around that's unsupervised, well, Rita can show you what happens.
Oh no. Nino. Nino, what is this? No, I don't want your hugs right now. Nino, come on, let's go upstairs. No, there's no, I'm not giving you treats. Nino, what is this? Oh my god. Oh no, there's one, there's two. Where's the Is there more? Nino, is this why we're so quiet? No, you've been a bad kitty. You've been a bad kitty. Oh, Nino. I can't make this up. Baby, no. Oh, I need to take this away from you. You naughty. You went after this as well. Nino. And they were up there too. How did you find that out? Oh my god. No, I don't want your hugs. No, I don't want your love right now.
So, yeah, the cat treats have to be kept under lock and key now because of this little bugger. But I mean, honestly, if that's the worst thing about him, I can put up with it. Oh, notice all the cat toys, by the way. He plays with them a lot more than the other two do. He's much more playful and just as affectionate as Akazuki is. I mean, boy cats do tend to be more affectionate than girl cats. I kind of lucked out with Akazuki, but notice the destruction that he's wreaked on the cat toys. You see the black cord lying next to him? There used to be a cat toy attached to that. Any kind of cat toy that basically consists of a stick with a piece of string or a line and then something fluffy or jingly on the end of it, he just destroys. He bites clean through the string. He's gone through 3 of them so far. That black cord there's the remainder of 1. You can see another one there. There's the stick, there's the line, and the fluffy thing next to it used to be attached to the line, but he just bites clean through them. He's a biter. Look at him, looking all innocent. Yeah, he's very, very good at looking innocent. This is the picture Rita took when she caught him with the cat treats. Look at him. He's like, what? Wasn't me. Honestly, he's just amazing. And I'm so happy that the other two, I mean, Akazuki especially, didn't take her long at all to come around to him. But even Juzi, who I thought was going to be a big problem, actually turned out not to be a big problem. And of course, he was no problem whatsoever. He just wanted to play and get to know the other two straight away. So, yeah, really, really happy. He's going to be a fantastic addition to the household. And I'm just really happy that I'm able to give him a forever home because he deserves it. He's an incredibly good, handsome young man. So, yeah. Nino, latest addition to the household. And speaking of additions to the household, how about that new PC? So, I've recorded a couple of demonstration videos for you showing the system off. What it can do, and surprisingly also what it can't. So, here are the specifications. It's an AMD Ryzen 7 9800X 3D processor. It's an RTX 5090 graphics card. I have 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM and 8 terabytes of M2 SSD storage. Now, as you'd expect, this is a powerful machine. And here we are running Cyberpunk with all of the bells and whistles turned on. Maximum ray tracing overdrive, like as good as it can possibly look. Now, frame generation is on. And I'm getting about 220 frames per second. Pay particular attention to the reflections, especially over the vehicle, as it passes underneath all these different light sources, and just look at how highly detailed these reflections are. I mean, they're amazing. And it's not just on the vehicle as well. The reflections on any kind of wet or metallic surfaces in the world environment are really good. And yet there is still some pop-up. This is running at 4K, obviously. Well, it was recorded at 4K, you're watching it at 2K, because that's the resolution I upload to YouTube in. So, here's the thing though. While this is all extremely impressive, it's getting that 220 frames per second with frame generation. So, how about I turn all of this off? I mean, at these settings, without frame generation, it looks incredible. And I still get more than 200 frames per second, which is more than acceptable. But if you don't have this kind of system, and you can only run Cyberpunk at medium graphic settings with no ray tracing, how's it going to look? Because we're going from the kind of settings that will bring most PCs to their knees to the kind of settings that you could quite happily play the game at 1080p resolution on an older graphics card like a GTX 1080. There has to be some kind of serious graphical trade-off there, right? Not really, no. Same game, same system, obviously, except this time running with no ray tracing on and with medium graphics settings. On this system, and I am still playing in 4K, whereas if you had something like a GTX 1080, you'd be playing it in 1080p resolution rather than 4K, but the vast majority of people still play games in 1080p. They're only just starting to switch over to 2K. And I'm getting about 350 frames per second, but honestly, once you go over 100, what difference does it make? And can you really tell any difference between this, running at medium settings with no ray tracing, and the previous clip that was recorded with ray tracing overdrive? I mean, you can, paying particular attention to the reflections on the car body. There are still reflections, but they're nowhere near as clearly defined as they were in the previous clip. But that is the sort of thing that you notice and you think, wow, that looks amazing, you know, with ray tracing overdrive on, and then you stop noticing it. To all intents and purposes, it looks basically the same. So you can run Cyberpunk on medium settings with no ray tracing enabled on a 9-year-old graphics card, and it looks incredible. How about something a bit more modern? Well, not that much more modern, but something that actually requires ray tracing, like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which does come with its own built-in performance metrics that you can see there in the top right of the screen. Now, this game does not yet fully support frame generation. I mean, it kind of does, but it doesn't support like 50 series graphics card frame generation. It'll support double frame generation, but no higher. There is a patch coming out for it this week, I think, that will enable that. Now take a look at the vegetation in this game. Every single leaf and blade of grass is fully 3D rendered in the world, which is why I'm getting about 100 frames per second. Again, this is with maximum ray tracing, all of the bells and whistles turned on a $2,000 graphics card. Without frame generation, about 100 frames per second, which is fine, but you'd expect more. I mean, it's entirely playable, of course it is, it's 100 frames per second. And with frame generation becoming available in the next patch, it's probably going to end up playing at 300 frames per second. But the thing is, you're getting this performance, you don't need to turn frame generation on. But what I want you to pay particular attention to is the environment. The graphical density of the environment, the way every single leaf and blade of grass is actually a rendered 3D object in the game world. And now we're going to go and take a look at Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Now, while you can run Cyberpunk reasonably well on modest settings, although obviously without any ray tracing on a 9-year-old GTX 1080, you can run Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 on a 9-year-old GTX 1060. So it's not going to look anywhere near as good as a well, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle or a Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, you'd be surprised. So, the game is capped at either 30 or 60 frames per second unless you turn VSync off. So with VSync disabled, you'll get to see the actual maximum possible frame rate. By default, it tends to limit everything to 30 frames per second during cutscenes and 60 frames per second everywhere else, unless you turn the VSync off. You can see my graphics settings. The one thing that you're not going to notice in there anywhere is the ray tracing settings, because there is no ray tracing in this game. This is why you can run it on a GTX 1060. However, you'd expect that with these kind of low-end system requirements and no ray tracing at all, that it's not going to look that good. And you'd be wrong. 150 frames per second. I mean, you know, on my system you'd expect at least that. But you'll also notice that unlike in something like Indiana Jones, the vegetation, the grass, they're not fully rendered 3D objects, they're sprites. But does it matter? It still looks really, really good. I am of course running it on the maximum possible graphics settings, but there's no ray tracing. So the maximum settings aren't that demanding. And it does look really good. I'm surprised I'm only getting 150 frames though. But, I mean, unless you're playing a competitive multiplayer first-person shooter, how many frames do you need? I mean, this is a single-player game. Anything above 60 and you're golden. Let's take a ride around on the old nag, Pebbles. So, yeah, I mean, the skybox, the clouds, I don't even know if they are volumetric clouds. I suspect it's just a skybox, and they're not particularly high resolution. But like the vegetation, compared to the vegetation in Indiana Jones, and the overall level of graphical fidelity in something like Cyberpunk 2077, when you're actually playing the game, it's the sort of thing that you are going to notice. You look up and you think, oh yeah, low resolution clouds. You know, in the same way that when you're playing Indiana Jones, you think, wow, every single leaf and blade of grass is individually rendered. That when you're playing Cyberpunk with ray trace and overdrive on, you notice just how incredibly crisp and detailed all of the reflections are. But then you just stop noticing because you're playing the game, you're not paying attention to the details. And it's the same here in Kingdom Come Deliverance too, because these are not the sort of things that you really notice unless they're either especially good or they're especially bad. And there is nothing especially bad about the graphics in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I mean, it's kind of like a medieval version of Red Dead Redemption 2. And it does look very similar. I mean, it is very, very nice. Still, I'm a little disappointed that I'm only getting 170 frames, but like I said, in a single-player game, anything over 60 is overkill. How about medium graphics settings, though? How does this game look on medium settings? You know, the kind of settings that you're probably going to enable if you are running this game on an older card, like a GTX 1080, for example, or one of the very early 2000 series RTX graphics cards, which weren't actually that much better than the GTX 1080 in the first place. They just supported ray tracing, and certainly looked better if you turned the ray tracing on in games that supported it at the time, but suffered from horrible performance issues. So let's drop things down to medium graphics settings in this brand new, only just come out, if I can find it, where is it? 2025 game, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, with no ray tracing, because even if your card supports it, the game doesn't, and medium graphics settings. Here we go. Overall image quality. Let's drop it down to medium. Confirm. Save the changes. It's going to load everything back in. Let me know if you can actually tell the difference. Because I can't. In fact, the only difference that I can tell is that now I'm getting 250 frames per second. Wow. In the same way that you can turn on ray tracing overdrive in Cyberpunk, and it looks great, but you can also drop it down to medium settings with no ray tracing, and it still looks great unless you're really paying attention to the details. It's exactly the same in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. It looks really good, regardless of the settings. The only difference that you're going to notice is your frame rate's going to double when you drop it down to medium. Now, I did say that there were a couple of surprises on the different games that I was testing out on the new system, and this wasn't one of them. Although, it was kind of surprising. Now, the big surprise came when I downloaded, installed, and tried to play Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 was released on the 27th of October 2023, so it's about a year and a half old game. It's certainly not as new as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. And it was known for being fairly demanding if you cranked all of the settings up to maximum. So let's take a look at it with all of the settings up to maximum and frame generation on. So as you can see, it's using DLSS to upscale the resolution from 2K, which is what it's actually rendering, to 4K, which is what it's outputting, and frame generation is at 4 times. So it's actually only generating 1 frame, and then it's guessing the next 3. So only 1 frame out of 4 is actually being generated. Everything else is cranked up as high as it will possibly go. And remember, this is not a new game. I mean, it's not a particularly old game, but it's only about a year and a half old. And it looks good. It doesn't look amazing, although that may be because I've been spoiled by playing on an RTX 4080 for the last couple of years, but it certainly does look good. At the point where my game is currently saved, you can't actually leave the police station morgue and go outside and
I can't force it open.
stretch the capabilities of the game engine. The view distance down here is only about 10 meters, but I mean the reflections are very, very nice. And it does look good. It just doesn't look incredible. But like I said, maybe I've just been spoiled. I mean, the reflections are very nice. And I'm getting, even with frame generation, I'm getting about 60 frames per second. I've no idea what the 1% lows are, but let's turn frame generation off and see what happens. So we're going to leave the render resolution at 2K and upscale it to 4K with DLSS, but I've turned frame generation off, and now let's see what happens. Everything else is still on ultra settings. And remember, this is an AMD Ryzen 7 9800X 3D processor, 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, and an RTX 5090 GPU with 32 gigabytes of VRAM. And with frame generation turned off, the FPS dropped from about 60 to 70 to around about 50. Let's see what happens if I actually render it at 4K. So there's no upscaling going on here. The game's now being rendered at the native resolution of my monitor, with no upscaling and no frame generation. This is not going to be pretty. Everything else is cranked up as high as it will possibly go, which is entirely reasonable for a 1.5-year-old game running on an RTX 5090. The frame rate is now dropping to about 33 frames per second, and my 1% lows are about 25 frames per second. So I've turned off all the fancy upscaling and frame generation, and it still looks more or less exactly the way it looked when I first fired the game up, except now the frame rate is in the toilet. I mean, it's actually horribly noticeable. It's not quite unplayable, but it's almost there. On a 1.5-year-old game with the latest, greatest computer technology running it. So I guess what I'm saying here is that there's absolutely no reason to be experiencing a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out, just because Nvidia have released a new generation of graphics cards. Because with the exception of a small number of games that actually require ray tracing, like, well, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and I believe the new Doom game also requires ray tracing, although sadly more games are going to require it. But unless a game actually requires ray tracing, it looks great even without it. Yes, you'll notice some differences at first when you're looking for them, but during the normal course of gameplay, it's not going to make any difference. The only thing that really matters is that it looks good, and most of these games look great even on medium settings, even with older technology, and you get an acceptable frame rate. And since the majority of people are still playing games at 1080p resolution and are only just starting to move up to 2K, almost all of these games play great and look great even on the older 10 series of graphics cards. So, I mean, yeah, sure, it's nice to have the latest, greatest gaming tech, but if you can play the games that you want to play at a reasonable, by which I mean a minimum of 30 frames per second, and you're happy with the way they look, nobody needs to upgrade. And in a surprising number of cases, even if you have upgraded, it doesn't end up making things look that much better. Certainly not to a degree that you're actually going to notice, unless you're Hardware Unboxed or Gamers Nexus and you're doing a hardware review. Because when you're actually playing the game, unless those details are especially good, or in the case of something like Alan Wake 2, especially bad, you're not paying attention. You're playing the game. So don't worry about your hardware. Most of you probably don't need to upgrade. The current system that you have is just fine. And on that note of reassurance, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you something to think about. Maybe it's given you something to talk about in the comments. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.